What's up guys, welcome back to another video, and today we have a pretty special guest. Her name is Katia. She is an M2 at Jefferson and she is a non-traditional medical student, and we're going to just be talking a little bit about that whole experience and what led up to it. So first of all, can you talk a little bit about like whether or not you were a pre-med during college, or if you like switched afterwards?
Yeah, sure. I definitely was on the pre-med track all throughout college, so it was kind of like my family always really wanted me to go into medicine, and we're kind of like I immigrated to the States from Russia when I was 5, so it was very much that like immigrant parent mentality of like get your kid into law school or med school or etc. So yeah, definitely like that was a big push, and I felt like I never really questioned it. You know, I did everything through college, and then things changed when I graduated. So I went to Bryn Mawr College for undergrad, and afterwards I did what's called a Watson Fellowship, which is basically a one-year program where you design a project, independent research exploration about something you're very passionate about. So for me it was the mind-body connection and I guess healing in contemplative communities. I was really into Buddhism and mindfulness at the time, and was kind of like taking classes in college on that. And so I did this really cool travel fellowship for a year, and I lived in Germany, in India, Thailand, Japan, and Peru. And then that's where I kind of was like, wait, what am I doing with my life? You know, like I started to question the kind of like just, you know, follow, like, I guess like it's a pipeline, right? Like once you get on it, everything is about like getting into school and like putting a check mark next to something like to get through to the next step. And like I hadn't really questioned it a lot until I like saw the world with my eyes and just like saw how many different ways there are to live life. And then I really questioned kind of what I was doing, but I still applied. So I was, you know, I remember like it was like the application's long, so I remember like sitting in Japan and like typing away my like little like personal statement and everything, and kind of dreading it, but still going through with it. It was crazy, but yeah. And then afterwards, that I would still have a following year while, you know, interviews and stuff took place. So during that time, I applied for a healthcare innovation fellowship. That was in DC, and I came back to the States and just like moved to DC right away, and that was another year of stuff. And then at that point I was even like, I had kind of like an existential crisis, I guess, because I was really unsure of what I wanted to do, and it just like felt like I was moving towards med school and it was like creeping up on me, but I wasn't really ready to go. So those first 2 gap years, I guess, were planned, but after that I had to unplanned gap years. I wasn't even really sure I was gonna go to med school by the end of it, so I deferred for 1 year, and during that time I backpacked. I did like a little bit of freelance work and like editing for a biotech company, and I backpacked in Central and South America for 6 months and just like continued my travels. And you know, something that I guess to me it felt like I was just continuing my the year-long project, because that was like one of those things I'm super passionate about, and it's like it's not work, it's play. So I just like did what I love doing, which is like talking to really interesting people who are healers of different varieties. And yeah, and then I came back, and then after that year, I also, like, in between there, I stayed in Russia with my family for 2 months, like trying to figure things out, and there was like a lot of like changes in my life. And then I came back. It was time to finally go to med school, and again I couldn't do it, and this was really unusual that they let me defer for a second year, but I'm so grateful they did, because I obviously wouldn't be in med school if that wasn't the case. So I did some job searching, and which was a little tricky because I had like I guess it in the like corporate job world, doing your own thing and like doing a cool fellowship for a year doesn't mean a whole lot. So it was a little tricky to like not be fresh out of college looking for a job without a lot of, I guess, like corporate work experience. But I eventually worked in Silver Spring, Maryland for a nonprofit that essentially coordinated safety nets for recent immigrants to the US who were maybe undocumented, low income, just to make sure they had access to like all of the necessary healthcare services. So that I really liked the mission of that. And then I was also freelance writing for a biotech company in Boston at the time, and writing about artificial intelligence. So like a lot of mix of different things, but at the end of the day, I was just, at the very end, I was kind of trying to create a life that would be like, okay, I'm not going into med school, this is what my life will be like. I could, you know, I have an apartment, a job, everything, like I'm settled into a city. If I say no, this is, you know, this is it, and then I go from here. But I think after working in that like office job for 5 months, I just realized like I'm not really like critically thinking, or like the work isn't like stimulating enough for me, and I just decided that I would rather be like learning. And you know, I was really scared of going into medicine because it's a big commitment, and like I just know the system here isn't perfect, so I'm a little scared even now about it. But I decided to take the plunge, and here I am, second year.
So now, as you said in the beginning, like you come from Russia and you have, I guess, pretty traditional Russian parents. You said like doctor, lawyer. I know I have pretty similar parents, like doctor, lawyer.
Well,
like,
nobody in my family is a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah, I mean like the path for the kids is hopefully like doctor, lawyer, engineer, something like that. Mm-hmm. And so now you had a lot of very interesting, and they seem very like traveling the world during those 2 gap years, and then taking a 3rd and a 4th gap year. What were your like parents' thoughts during that entire process?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like there's like a point where like if you're offered this really rare and unique fellowship opportunity, you can't say no to it. Like I spent months interviewing for it, and like it was really lucky that I got it, and I felt super grateful. But you don't turn stuff like that down. So it wasn't like am I allowed to go? It was like I'm going to do this, and you can conquer your fear about like having your child travel by themselves for a year with a backpack. Like there's, you know, that wasn't really like a negotiable thing. And I think, yeah, I guess that was like a little bit of becoming just like a lot more independent and like more self-reliant on myself for making decisions. But I kind of still had that like I guess like family and society pressure of like medicine is this prestigious thing that you do in your life that's successful. But I guess I just like was so conflicted because I learned that success can actually be so many different things. It's not just, yeah, it's something completely different from what was told to me all those years.
Mm-hmm. And now you said that you had briefly mentioned that you were in Japan. So what is a like a complete list of the countries that you visited during that time.
Yeah, so we were kind of under the program, under the Watson Fellowship, we had to choose specific project countries. So my main ones were Germany, India, Thailand, Japan, and Peru. So that's where I would live for like 2-3 months in each country. But I did travel a little bit, like when I was in Europe, I went to France and Switzerland. I actually met a friend who was she was a Buddhist nun at a monastery in Germany, and then when I was in Thailand, she happened to be able to visit her family in Vietnam, so I visited her there. Yeah, and then Japan and Peru, and Paraguay. My friend was in the Peace Corps at the time, so I visited Paraguay before coming home. So it was a lot of different places. It was really cool.
Of all, you might not have a favorite, but of all of the countries, which one do you think was either your favorite or the most interesting or most different from what you were used to?
I definitely have to say India was my favorite. It was my first like foray into a culture like so completely different from my own, and I'm not just talking about like US culture. I also growing up would visit my family in Russia a lot, and that's also like a different culture, but this was really like very different, and I loved it so much. Like the people I met, I just happened to meet very kind people who just, you know, like took me in and befriended me and were, you know, shared so much with me. So I think like each place, like it really depends. I mean, like sure, the place is important, but it's like also about the people you meet, and I met the most wonderful people in India, so that was like the highlight of my trip probably.
So after taking 4 gap years and entering medical school, how do you think having taken those gap years has impacted your experience and like approach to the entire medical school experience or journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that coming into med school, like I just remember myself in college, I was just so, you know, I don't know, like I worked super hard, and like I said no, like my friends would be like, hey, let's watch a movie, or hey, let's go there, and I'd be like, no, I have a biochem exam, like I really need to memorize these amino acids. And then I just realized like that in the grand scheme of life, those things are so minuscule and insignificant that I just like learned to better value like what things are actually important. So I think having life experiences after college really helped me see like the completely larger picture, and maybe a little bit too much so, because now like as it's like approaching step time, I'm kind of like, man, I should have taken last year a little more seriously. Not that I didn't, but just I think some people were very like, I could see that they were super tense and antsy about everything, and I was just like a lot more relaxed about things. Yeah, I think I would say that was like the really big difference. Like had I gone straight in, I would have just continued to burn myself out like the same way I did in college. Yeah.
That means when you entered medical school, you were 26?
Yeah, I was 26.
Mm-hmm. So did you feel especially with like a person like Sayona as a roommate who was like on the accelerated track and younger than almost every other medical student there, did you feel that there was like an age difference, or did you feel that like when you're in medical school, everyone's just a medical student?
So I definitely, yes, I did feel, especially in the beginning, I felt an age difference, because I think just like the different life experiences people have had, but it doesn't mean that if you're young you haven't had like it just depends on the person, I guess. And I think it varies person to person, because like especially like with our, you know, Siona's our mutual friend, like with her, I think she's just like very mature, so I never felt like, oh, here is this very, very young person and we're so different. I did not feel that at all with her. I think like with other people it maybe was a little bit different, and I did have like more of that sense of difference. But I think there's like something that I appreciated this year is that there are like quite a few like non-traditional students that I wasn't really aware of last year. Like I felt like, oh, I'm like the one, like usually people take max like 3 gap years, or unless they're like coming in from a second career or something altogether, and like are like have a family already and are in a different state of their, like different phase of their life. But this year somebody created a group at Jeff called Oldies But Goodies, which I appreciate, and I learned that there's actually like quite a few even like among my classmates, like there are people I didn't know were older, but they are, and it's good to like have those connections. And so I think it can feel, sometimes you feel a little bit like, oh, I'm like, here I am. I think it also depends on the school. Like my friend goes to Wake Forest, and I know there like almost everybody like took like 2 to 3 gap years or like were even more. And then Jefferson, I think it runs a little bit on the younger side, so I think it's also like school dependent.
So now, in terms of advice, this is going to be 2 questions, so I'll just ask them one at a time. So first of all, do you have any advice for people who want to take gap years or are thinking about going the non-traditional route?
Yeah, so I guess that's like a question. Do I regret taking 4 years off? Would I have preferred to go straight in? And sometimes, yeah, sometimes there are some days when I'm like, I will be 30 by the time I graduate from med school, versus like if you start at like accelerated program at 21, you will be still like your mid-20s by the time you finish med school, and that's obviously a difference. But I think in the grand scheme of things, aside from those moments, I prefer having had those years, even if it was, you know, not 1, not 2, not 3, 4. I think I prefer that, because I'm not sure, like, if you're on the pre-med track, so to say, and you're like in this like funnel, like, you know, there's like everything is so planned out for you years in advance, like college, med school, residency, fellowship, and then you're like, and now I'm 40 or whatever, like everything. If you don't take time to create really interesting experiences for yourself, you will arrive at 40 without seeing things, like without seeing certain things. So I think that and that's okay if you want to do, if like you are very like, you know that like medicine is 100% your thing, like the thing that makes you like, the thing that you would do for fun and not for work is like be in ophthalmology, like then you should totally like, you know, go straight through, like do your jam if you know that already. But I think if you're not 100% certain, I think it's good to like explore the world and take the time while you're young to do that, instead of saying like, oh, when I'll retire and then I'm gonna go explore Iceland like I've always wanted to. Like it's just not, it's gonna be very different. So I think I have to remind myself of that sometimes, but that's like at the end of the day, I think that holds true.
Yeah, like I know there's that entire idea, like I know having grown up as an Asian, with like Asian parents and stuff, there's that idea like you miss out on a little bit of fun today so that you have a better future tomorrow. At what point do you think it's important for you to like stop and be like, well, why don't I live that better tomorrow, like today?
Yeah, so I actually this is so funny that you're asking this question, because I don't know if you've ever heard of, there's an awesome podcast that I tell about to people all the time, but it's called The Drive by Katia. I really enjoy listening to it. It's like a lot of various topics are covered, but one podcast episode I've recently listened to was about Stoicism. I don't know if you're familiar. It's this really interesting like philosophy and way of life, but it's the idea that each moment that happens, like, it will never happen again. So you have to like, I feel like that's kind of like trite, and we all know that, like, to a certain sense, so it sounds like almost like meaningless to say it, but if you really like reflect on that and think about it, then the only way to like live a fulfilled life, I guess, in that philosophy is to do exactly like what you said, is that you have to make the most of each moment. And I think that for a long time, at least, I was living in the future. Like in college, I was living like 10 years in the future, and then when I arrived at the finish line, I think I regretted missing some of those really important times with friends, and you can't get those back. So I think it's very important to like try to live as presently as you can in each moment. And I think also because that way, like what I learned from my Watson year and that like journey of being completely open and just like, oh, I met this person and then they told me about this meditation conference, so I'm gonna go there, and then I'm gonna meet this really interesting person there, and they're gonna connect me with their friend, and I'm gonna go to this city and like study yoga with like this, you know, teacher that they know. Like if you're kind of like, this is like applies to life in general, but if you come in and you have a set plan and you're like, I'm doing this and this and this, and you're very rigid about it, you're just not going to be able to be open to those kind of opportunities, I think. And it's a little hard, like, because, you know, like here there's like a routine and daily life is different from traveling, obviously, but I think it's like a good philosophy to try to integrate. So I guess I'm trying to learn a little bit more about Stoicism and that approach, but yeah, gotta live more in the now and less about just like the future, I guess.
I'm gonna end this out on one last question, and that's just gonna be so not everyone necessarily wants to take a gap year, but I do think that there is probably a lot of wisdom that you've learned from your gap years that everyone could use to, that applies to everyone, even the students who aren't planning on taking gap years. I'm phrasing this really badly, but what are some like pieces of advice that you've learned from taking gap years that you can give to those who aren't necessarily gonna go on that path?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what I was just saying. I think is kind of just be open to different opportunities, and yeah, I guess, I don't know, it's like to say just like be open-minded and open to things that might come up, and just, you know, I don't know, like a thing that I did a lot, like when I was networking for my Watson project, was I would talk to a connection that I had, you know, here in the, like here, and then they would be like, oh, you should talk to this person. I guess like keep asking if you're interested in something and you want to know more or explore something without going anywhere, without taking a gap year off, just find somebody you can talk to, and then always end it with, who do you recommend I reach out to next, or who should I talk to more about this? Because I think that allows you to arrive at some really interesting places and meet some very interesting people. Yeah, I guess that would be my advice for for the non-gap year crew.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I recently read a book called Give and Take by Adam Grant. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And I think there's something to be said about what you just said. Like he talks about in the book about making connections, and how I think a lot more people are willing to lend a hand than you would think. And I think sometimes, like as you said, like in that entire pipeline, like reaching out of it seems like a more daunting task. And because it's not necessarily required, a lot of times it just doesn't happen. And I think it's really interesting that you said that you talk a lot about like just like trying to be open to the possibility that you don't have to be following that one path really strictly. So I think that was really interesting. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. That was Katia, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.